Welcome, I'm Bonnie Hacking, and I am Program Manager in the University of St Andrews Entrepreneurship Centre. And I'm delighted to be with you today and to welcome you to the very first of our Innovation Week events this week. My sort of background, so I've got quite a varied background. I started out my working life many years ago in Hilton Hotels Corporation in the United States, working in procurement. When I came to the UK, I worked for a Unipart group of companies for many years, first in procurement, but then in cultural change and organizational development. And myself and my team were responsible for quite a number of things, one of which included facilitating strategy deployment across the organization of 10,000 employees in 500 sites across the UK, as well as implementing a number of programs. I then moved from Unipart Group of Companies to Oxfordshire County Council, where I was Leadership Development Manager. Again, a pretty big organization, about 2,500 staff in 5 different directorates. And so again, working really on leadership. So leadership has been a thing for me for a long time. And then laterally, I came to the university to be enterprise advisor, because alongside those roles that I mentioned, I was a young enterprise business advisor down in England. And so really worked with young people that wanted to start a business or think about self-employment in a particular education business charity. So a little bit about today. Thanks so much to those of you who've had an opportunity to tell me who you are, tell us who you are, and a little bit about what you're hoping to get out of today. I will try to answer some of those questions and keep on track. I'm very happy to answer questions throughout. I will try to keep an eye on the chat, so feel free to pop things into chat as we go through. So in terms of today, it's been billed as CEO training, which it will be. I will say that it will be quite high level in some senses, and you'll find out more about what I mean by that as we go through. So one of the things that I would really like to give you some insight into is to what's the difference between being a CEO in a startup versus being a CEO in an established company. And we'll talk about some of the elements of leadership after that. So we'll look at the idea of vision and leadership. We'll spend a little bit of time thinking about hiring and building a strong team. We'll talk a little bit about go-to-market strategy, and finally, a little bit about financial planning. We have about an hour, so I could probably cover each of those topics in the space of a week to give it the kind of weight and time that it deserves, but also time for you to think through and work on things. So hopefully what today will do is to give you some things to think about, inspire you, and help you to think further about the whole issue of startups and being a CEO. So to get us started off, what would you say is the role of a CEO? Chief Executive Officer. Pop your answers into chat for me. What is the role of a CEO? Okay, taking responsibility. Leading, ensuring compliance with company strategy, guiding the organization and building a strategy. The CEO is the leader who steers the company to ensure that they reach their set goals. Leading, inspiring, forming a vision, reporting to the board, strategic direction and vision, making day-to-day decisions to try and reach strategic goals set by the board. Some great answers there. So if those are some of the roles of a CEO or some of the things that they actually do, what would you say makes a good one? So what makes a good CEO? Again, you can type those things into chat for me. So actively engaged at all levels of the organization. Someone who leads and is trusted, looked up to and admired. Able to make decisions, whether right or wrong, you need to make decisions. Great, if they're wrong, then a good CEO notices and rectifies those. Communicates well and can make decisions based on many different inputs. Some great answers there. So I'm getting the sense, quite rightly, that the CEO is really the strategic lead for the organization, that they do a lot of work to set the vision, to set the strategy, and then to lead the team in that direction and to help them inspire and motivate them to do that. And so for me, some of those speak to being a good leader. And so for me, I would suggest that the essence of leadership is a number of things. So one is vision, and that's a positive image of what the organization could be and the path towards that destination. And that vision should be powerful, it should be compelling, and it should be meaningful. And in a startup, what that often means is there's an awful lot of uncertainty. This is not a journey that's been traveled before, particularly by this organization. And so the vision really needs that sort of meaningful bit means that it does need to connect with the people in that organization, or the people in that organization need to be able to connect with that vision and understand and support it. And so in order to do that, the CEO, the key strategic or the top strategic leader in that organization needs to be able to inspire people, and that means to move them to action. So it's not just about having that vision, it's not just about setting that direction or that strategy, it's actually exciting people about that vision, making them understand it and making them want to move in that direction and to achieve. And in order to do that, they need to have momentum. They need to have a lot of energy to help that organization take sometimes what might be small steps that's going to help to carry the organization to its destination. So they need to be able to build confidence. Sometimes it might be some quick wins. So the leader would be seeing perhaps the big picture of where that organization could go and how they could get there. And they can see that, but oftentimes their followers, the people in the team, are thinking, so what does that mean for me and my role? What does that mean for what I'm going to do here? And those are some of the things that the leader needs to be aware of when they are actually forming their role, forming their team, and getting things moving, particularly in a startup. And so I would suggest that being effective really relies on trust and self-knowledge. And this for me, so trust I think is relatively self-explanatory. The people in that organization have to be able to trust that that leader, that CEO is going to do their job well, and that they're going to have the backs of the people within that organization. And I think one of the things that I have seen in a number of the startups that I've worked with is perhaps less emphasis on self-knowledge. So I'm going to put this out here right now. I've worked with any number of startups who the original founder, maybe that's the person that has the idea, maybe that's the person that invented the technology or is developing the technology, and that person sees themselves as the CEO. And I would suggest that that's sometimes not the correct decision for that organization. And that part of the gap there is that that individual doesn't have the right level of self-knowledge to understand both what the role of the CEO needs to be within that organization, but also what their strengths, their abilities, their competencies are in relation to that role. And so I'll park that thought with you and you can think that through and we'll come back to it. So in terms of the context within which a leader operates, and I do think some CEOs, some leaders forget this, it's not just about the person. So to be an effective leader, yes, of course, as a CEO, as a leader, you have to understand your own skills, your own qualities, and your own behaviors. And I'm not saying that the person who takes on the role of CEO in a startup has to be the most experienced, has to have the longest CV because they've done a lot of things, but they do have to have the skills, the qualities, and the behaviors that are needed within that role. But within that role, within that organization, and I would suggest that this is one of the key differences between a CEO in a startup and a CEO in an established organization. So in an established organization, a lot of the things that you'll see there, the vision, the values, the culture, the structure, things that are not listed there, the policies, the procedures, the way we do things around here, all of those are fairly established in a company that's been running even for a relatively short time, but probably for a few years. And so a CEO at that level has quite a lot of structure and a lot of processes and a lot of resources already in place. Whereas in a startup, all of those things are being created. And they're being created at the same time that new nascent young startup is trying to get into the marketplace. is trying to make sure that its product is meeting the needs of the customers or the users. And so there's quite a bit more need to be perhaps flexible and resilient within a startup because things are going to change sometimes on a daily basis. And then I think one thing that a lot of other people forget is that leaders also have followers. So you have people in that organization who are working for the CEO, working for other levels of management, who will have their own skills, qualities, and behaviors. And in a startup where maybe you have some co-founders, you have to start with maybe a small team of co-founders, and you might designate yourself, so one will say take on the role of being the CEO. One might take on the role of being the CTO, the chief technical officer. You might have someone that takes on the role of perhaps sales, marketing. You'd have a number of different roles, but relatively small team. And all of those people will have their own skills, their own qualities, and their own behaviors, but also their own expectations of what they want to both contribute to that startup and what they want to get out of it. And so I think thinking about those three different realms, if you like, the skills, qualities, behaviors of the leader, but also the followers, and then how those fit within the context of the organization can help individuals who either are a CEO in a startup or aspiring to be a CEO in a startup can start to think about the interplay of some of those things and therefore how you yourself can step into that role. I would suggest that there are a lot of differences. I've put a few down here. I'm sure you could probably think of a bunch more. A startup, as I said earlier, is generally quite small, at least to start with, a small kind of founding team often, maybe with a few workers or a few people doing particular roles. So in a startup, that CEO is going to wear multiple hats, and that could be from strategy, from that high level sort of strategy all the way down to doing the operations, because today's the day we have to get 2,000 of those product out the door and there's no one else to do it. It's also quite a dynamic environment in that early startup phase where perhaps we've done the work, we've got the product or the service, whatever it is, ready to go. But we're still building that traction. We're still finding those customers. We're still getting those clients on board. We're still working out how some of the back of house things work. So how are we going to deal with what if the customer is not happy and they want to return that product? What's going to happen if their payment bounces? So some of these quite operational issues will have to be dealt with in a startup. And so a CEO can be going from that strategic level down to that operational level quite frequently because it's such a dynamic environment. Oftentimes, startups will have more limited resources. So even if a startup has funding from whatever source that is, they don't necessarily, and I'm not trying to say that established companies have got lots of money, but in general, they will have a more well-established way of getting those resources in and a clearer view on how the current resources they have can be used effectively in the business, whereas a startup is constantly often trying to find more. And in a startup, it'll be perhaps more hands-on aspirational leadership. So I work at the university at the moment. We have about 2,500 employees. We don't have a CEO as such. We don't recognize that title. But the senior person in my organization, I see her very rarely because she's working she's working on different things to me, and she has no reason to see me every day. I have no reason to see her every week. But in a startup where it's really small and where possibly you're working much more closely together, the people, those senior people with those kind of chief executive type titles will be working much more closely with people throughout the organization. Also in a startup, there might be higher levels of uncertainty and risk because these are things that haven't been done before, or certainly things that aren't proven in terms of what they can deliver and achieve. And so those are the kind of things that need to be dealt with. And then finally, the CEO will be engaging fairly closely, in all likelihood, with early investors, with the team, and with customers. Whereas, as I said, like in the university, if that's an example of an established organization, the person at the top of the structure here doesn't have to engage that closely because they've got a team underneath them, a team working with them and for them that actually do some of those things. So does anyone have any questions or any points that you wanted to make about some of the differences between a CEO in a startup or in an established business? Anything? No, that's fine. I say you're welcome to ask questions or pop things into chat as we go. If you wanted to hear a little bit more about some founders and some CEOs in startups, we do have a Beyond Startups podcast. It is on Spotify, and I'd encourage you to have a look at that. They tend to be university alumni, although we have had some people. If they haven't been on if they haven't been on yet, certainly this coming semester we have plans to do more, where we'll also have some of our spin out companies and other businesses. But I'll pop the link to that podcast into chat. But you're very welcome to listen to that. The episodes are about half an hour, and I think there are 9 of them up so far. So there's quite a lot more you can learn about being a CEO, about that role of being an early leading founder in a small startup. So moving on then to thinking about building your team. This is one of the topics that I always think people, well, they kind of forget about it. Or if they don't forget about it, they think, well, my friends and I, I've been talking to my friend about this idea, so I'm just going to get them on board. They're going to be my core team. And I'm going to encourage you to think about taking a slight step back from that and thinking a little bit more objectively about building your core team. And it really starts with understanding who you need. So if I were going to say, if I ask you, what are the characteristics of a winning sports team, what would you say? Again, pop them into chat. Characteristics of a winning sports team. Have a winning mentality. They work as a team. They have focus and a clear objective. They use teamwork and resilience. Resilience again. They have one vision. Different people for different roles. They have an effective leader who's respected by the team with a good teamwork attitude. They pursue excellence. They move past hurdles. They adapt. They focus on detail. So quite a wide range there. And I think you picked up on most of them. Because businesses have actually been likened to sports teams in which collaboration and contribution from several people is more valuable than the activities of a single person. And it's really important in a startup to develop both that sort of leadership side of things within the entrepreneurial venture, but also to create that teamwork environment that makes it work successfully. So it's super important to have a good team in an entrepreneurial venture. And one point I would make is that if your startup ever gets to the stage where you're looking for sort of angel investment or venture capital funding, so maybe quite sizable amounts of external funding, external capital, then those people will want to see a well-balanced team with the right skills that are needed to create that venture. And so winning sports team, as you said, has skills that are relevant to the task. They have a good strategy, good coaching, good captaining. But importantly, they have clear and effective playing. So they're actually good at what they do, both as a team and as individuals. They also have effective equipment, so they have the right tools that they need to do the job. And as people mentioned, they're effective at working together, that whole teamwork piece. But also they have that shared commitment to winning. And I think that's super important in a startup, although you may not call it winning. They have that shared commitment to actually achieving the objectives and getting that business out there, to getting that venture started up and working well. And so when it comes to forming your core team, I have a clip from a short video that I'm going to show because I think it goes through some of these things. It is from the Steps to Startup, which is a social shifters course. It's really focused at social enterprise, so you'll hear that language coming through, but it is actually a good video that covers off some of the things that we're talking about. So give me just a minute while I include sound.
Core team. Now let's dive in with a bit more detail. Let's look first at how you can build your core team. Building a team successfully is one of the kindest things you can do for yourself. Believe it or not, building a core team of people around you with the skills that you're missing and who have access to the resources that you don't is going to make your job a lot easier as you build your social enterprise. Remember, there is no I in team, but there is a me. I know it's corny, but it's really important to look out for yourself in building a social enterprise. You're going to be pouring hours into the work that you do, and having a support team is essential for your success. If you're not well and focusing on the things you're best at, your enterprise will suffer. Give yourself what you need and spend time away from the business so that you can give it 110%.
So basically what she is talking about is she's talking about the importance of looking for the right skills within your team. And she talks about that from a number of different perspectives, and I'll explain some of those to you. So some of the things she was just saying, that that it's essential to look after yourself, and that building a team is really helpful in that because you have a team of people that have complementary skills that can help you. But also that startups rise and fall on the people. So you could have the best product in the world or the best service in the world, but if you don't have the people involved in that startup who can deliver it and make it happen, then it's not going to be successful. And she quotes this African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And she looks at the roles of a core team slightly differently to CEO, which I think can be quite helpful. So she talks first about the entrepreneur. This is really the kind of person that is finding the customer, setting the pace. So they're the ones that are really on fire about this business and really keen to keep it going. So this is the person that perhaps holds the vision. The manager then is the person that perhaps helps to keep the business organized. So they're actually trying to keep track of the day-to-day things, perhaps doing the project management, trying to make sure that delivering to the customer, developing, doing all the different things that the business needs to do are happening effectively, and things are being organized to do that. And then the technician. So the subject matter expertise, the person, that technical person that can create the product or the service and make sure that it works and to fulfill the contracts. And I think that this is really quite an interesting way to look at it. And so any of those people could be the CEO. Even if the entrepreneur says holding vision, it might be in the longer term that's not the right person to be the CEO. So it's really important to know your own strengths, your own competencies, and to see where you would fit best into that founding team. And I will say it really, really is okay not to be the CEO, particularly if someone else has better skills or experience for the role. For some people, it might be to be the CTO, the Chief Technical Officer. As co-founders, you can agree the ownership and the share of each individual based on their contribution, not whose idea it was to start with. And so as you're thinking about how you can build your team and who you might want on your team, I'd encourage you to think about developing a competency list. So this is a list of all of the different skills and competencies, experiences that you need within your team. It might be based on roles similar to the ones that you see here, or there may be some other things more detailed that need to go into your startup. And I have a document. This is let me just see. This is the document that supports the video that I was going to show you. It really is just a simple spreadsheet. And on the first tab, what you have is a sample list of skills and competencies. And then on the second tab, what you've got is a place to note down the people who are in your network that perhaps you already know that might be able to fulfill some of those roles. And so I'll pop that into chat. Oh, and it's telling me, why is it telling me that? Okay, I'm gonna have to change the email file. Okay. So I'll pop that into the chat in just a moment. But I would suggest that you sit down and take a hard look at what is your startup trying to do? What are the skills that it needs right now, or that a point in time when you are trying to take that startup to market, what are the things that it actually needs in order to, the skills that it needs to actually be effective and to achieve success? And to note those down, and then to think quite objectively about who might be able to fulfill those. Because I can say that with many of the startups that I have worked with in the past, one of the things that causes the most angst is team, and it causes the most problems. Because oftentimes as people, it's just easiest to get your friend along. It's easiest. to actually say, hey, I've been talking to you about this idea for ages, come along. And that person may not necessarily be the right person. So thinking a little bit objectively about the skills that you need in your team, the competencies, can be really helpful. And another framework which I find quite interesting and I really quite like is in terms of recruitment, in addition to the skills, in a startup, I would suggest these are some of the things that you want to be on the lookout for. So you want someone, they call it the 5 E's. You want someone who has energy. When they walk into the room, they've really got something that's exciting, they're engaging, that they're really on fire and they really want to go and they want to make things happen. They're energizing, so they have the ability to make other people excited and feel passionate about what they're excited about. They maybe have that edge. They have something, that little something that puts them above the rest. Sometimes it might be skills or qualities. It might be something you can't quite quantify. Also importantly, they execute. So do they have a proven track record? Are there some references that show that they can execute and they have done that in the past? Because if they can't execute or they don't execute, you don't want them on your startup team. And I also think importantly is ethics. In a startup where you probably have a small number of people working together, those sort of ethics and values, shared ethics and values, are quite important because you'll be working really closely together. You'll be doing different things. You'll be flexible. You'll be resilient. You'll be changing. Things will be changing and shaping. And so that shared core of values and ethics will help you to always stay on track together. So those are some of the things that I would encourage you to think about when you are thinking about recruiting a team and building that core team. So if we move on to think a little bit about this go-to-market strategy, go-to-market strategy is it's not a marketing strategy. It's a lot more than that. It's how you're actually going to take this thing, this product, this service, this whatever it is, and you're going to get it into the hands of very specific customers and users. Now, we do 8-week programs that cover off that include this go-to-market strategy. So as I said earlier, this is going to be really, really super short in terms of what we're looking at here. But there would be, in order to get from having an idea to being in the marketplace, there are these kind of 3 things in this graphic, are sort of 3 things that need to be considered and that the CEO would need to be ensuring are happening and taking place. So if we start down with number 1, problem solution fit. So problem solution fit occurs when you have evidence that customers care about having certain jobs done, that maybe they have certain problems, certain pains, or they're looking for certain gains from the solution, from the idea that you've come up with. So whatever problem they have, you're trying to ascertain, does this idea, the solution for that problem that you've come up with, does it actually address the customer's problems? So at this stage, you've proved the existence of the problem. In other words, that there are people out there that are experiencing this challenge, this problem that you have actually come up with, and you've designed a value proposition that addresses that. Unfortunately, you may still not have clear evidence that your customer or your user cares enough about your value proposition to buy it, but you've got some evidence. And evidence doesn't mean that you looked on a website or you chatted to a friend. It means that you spoke to 20, 30, 50 potential clients or customers or users about the problem that they have before you really even think about what solution you're going to offer them. Number 2, that product market fit occurs when you have evidence that your value proposition, that what you're actually offering is actually creating something that the customers want. It's creating value for the customers. So it's actually solving their problem. It's alleviating their pain. It's creating some sort of gain that they desire. And at this stage, your product or service is possibly beginning to gain a little bit of traction in the marketplace. So you're maybe out there a little bit, and you've gone through the long and iterative process of running tests. So you've had an MVP or a prototype that you've gotten into the hands of potential users or customers. They've used it, they've given you feedback, they've said, yep, it works, it solves the problem, yes, it delivers the benefit, the gain that I want, and therefore I'm really happy with it. So it's been validated, and potentially some of it has been invalidated. Some of your assumptions have proven to be incorrect, but your value proposition is sound. You've iterated it's actually sound. And then 3, that business model fit occurs when you have evidence that that solution, that value proposition, is part of a profitable and scalable business model. In other words, the way you're going to earn money from it, and the way that all of the resources, all of the processes that you need to get it into the hands of the customers. So you've done all that really hard work between designing the value proposition, and you found the right business model to deliver that and to make sure that you're going to be financially sustainable and viable going forward. And so the CEO's role is really to lead the startup through these different phases. And so that go-to-market strategy, so this is really all about the kind of testing, proving, working out whether or not you've got some sort of a sustainable and viable business there. And so as part of that, and in taking it forward, you need to develop that go-to-market strategy. And the go-to-market strategy is after you've done all that validation work. So you know that you've got your problem solution fit. You know that you've got your market fit. And you've got your business model. You need to take it into the marketplace. So the go-to-market strategy involves identifying and finding the right customers for your business, and then building those right channels, the right ways of reaching and selling to them. So if we look back for a second, so here in that problem solution fit, you were actually speaking potentially to some potential customers or users, finding out whether or not your solution, what you were offering, works for them. And then when you've got that, you've maybe developed a prototype or a prototype, and you've got an actual something in their hand that they can use. And that's really helping you to refine that a bit further. And so part of that then is thinking about, okay, so, well, those first customers that I spoke to, it didn't really hit it for them because they're not quite the right customers. But through that process, that helped me to see that this little niche market, this little target market really are the right customers for me. And that's what this go-to-market strategy is about. It's actually looking at you could say, I speak to so many people that are like, well, anybody could use it. Anybody could use my thing. Well, you can't get it in the hands of anybody. But if you start very niche, so I work with a lot of students, and so for students, maybe that first target market is a group of students. But it might have to be more specific. It has to be students that have this particular problem. Because the closer you can hone it, the more niche you can get, the more targeted that you can get, the easier it is then to find them and to convince them that what you're offering, your solution, is for a problem that they have, and that what you're doing is going to be valuable for them, beneficial enough for them that they want to pay you for it. And so one of the differences between a go-to-market strategy and just a marketing plan is that the go-to-market strategy, actually focuses on doing something new. So it might be launching a new business, it might be launching a new product or a new service. A marketing strategy, on the other hand, is slightly different. So it's actually talking about delivering that value proposition over a really long period of time, but it will build on the insights that you've learned about your customers. And I'd suggest that one of the biggest mistakes that startups make with their go-to-market strategy is assuming that the go-to-market part comes after a product or an MVP is built. They really need to happen at the same time. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to build that product. And then when you go out to customers, well, it isn't quite what they want, because you didn't do that work of identifying that really target niche market that you're going to start with. So building your go-to-market strategy and your product or your service need to happen at the same time. And it really does take time to learn who's likely to be that right customer to go after. And through that process, you'll be learning what they'll respond to. which sort of channels or marketing media will actually grab their attention? Because it literally is not a case of paying for some online advertising. You really have to know precisely where your customers are, where to find them, and how to turn them into paying customers. And so I wanted to come back a little bit to this overall, what we describe as the venture creation process, because we're going to hone in just for the last few minutes on a sort of small bit of it for a few minutes. So in terms of venture creation, this is the process that we work with our spin-outs and our startups with. So it really starts with customer discovery. So what I was talking about in terms of developing a clear problem statement based on feedback from those potential users or customers that have the problem. And it's only after you've developed that understanding that then you start ideation. Then you start working out your solution for that particular problem. You do this whole idea of analyzing those customers and markets. And there's a tool called a customer persona, and it's what it sounds like. It's a kind of pen portrait of people who might have your problem that you can kind of group together. Said earlier, students would be one persona, but you might want to be very specific. You might want to say international students studying, I don't know, business. It could be whatever it is, but you want to be really specific. And then you'll use those personas and the work that you're doing and that you've spoken to these different customers, the customer discovery piece, to try and think about identifying those top 3 potential markets. And you want to identify them, but you also want to size them. You want to know how many people are in that market. And you want to make sure your value proposition is really super clear. In other words, what value, what benefit, what gain is your idea, your thing going to deliver to those potential customers and users? We've already talked about team building and some thoughts on how you can do that. The business model, I won't go into this in too much detail. We've got other resources on this, which we can talk about, but that really is the overall piece in terms of how you're going to earn money from it and how you're going to get it into the hands of the customer. And then also you've got getting ready to launch. So maybe you've got your minimum viable product designed. You've got the different personas. You've linked that to a problem statement. You've covered off any legal issues. For those of you who are university staff, if you are working on something that's related to your work or research, there may be some intellectual property issues there to be sorted out, and we can help you with that. And you have a strategic plan. But then also where I want to move now is to this financial and funding piece, and the potential role of a CEO in that. So you need to have your financial models complete. And what that means is at this point in time, you haven't delivered anything. You haven't quite started up yet. You've possibly spent some money, but we can talk about that later. But what you should have is you should have a pretty good understanding of what your costs will be, whether that is the cost of manufacturing, creating, building your thing, whatever it is. It could be the costs of people. It could be the costs of some sort of advertising or premises or other things like that. But also then you'll have had, if you've done your market sizing and you know, well, we're going for this niche market first and it has this many people in it and we're going to be able to, we're aiming for this percentage of that market, you'll be able to forecast what might your sales be. And so your financial models will include some of that. So it'll include some assumptions, but it'll include maybe some different takes on that. So what you might call a pessimistic forecast, if you don't sell as much as you thought you might, a kind of realistic or pragmatic one, and then perhaps a more aspirational one. But you'll need to have all that done. Because what you need alongside that is you need your funding and investment timeline. And you need to know that doing those financial models and a cash flow forecast enables you to think about, okay, so this is how much we're going to spend getting the MVP ready, and we're going to need funding for that. And then once we've got the MVP done and we've done some testing, we're going to need more to actually go out to market and produce this number of whatever it is. So you can have some certain points at which you're going to need funding. And so doing a good job of those financial models enables you to build that funding and investment timeline. And if you're going for any kind of external funding, be that angel or venture capital or whatever might be appropriate, you'll need to have a pitch deck, and you'll need to have pitches of different lengths practiced. And I would always say that everyone should have a pitch. I don't mean an investment pitch. I mean, you should be able to explain in 30 seconds to a minute what you're working on, what your solution is, what the problem you're solving is, what your solution is, and who would be interested in that, because you never know when you're going to need that. So in very, very slightly more, so this is where this comes from. What I want to say is that before we go any further, you need to remember that fundraising is a process. And like any process, there's more than one step involved, and you need a clear plan. And I speak to a number of people who think, well, I need to, because I need X number of, pounds or dollars, whatever it might be, I'm going to need to raise angel funding or investment or venture capital before I go any further. But they are a million miles away from being investment ready. And again, I can talk all day about being investment ready. It isn't a small matter if you need quite a lot of money to do what you're doing. And again, we can support you to do that. But you will need all this information. And that forecast in terms of how much money you need and at what points is absolutely key. It needs to be extremely realistic, and it needs to be based on sound research and understanding. I recently did some of the internal judging for the Converge Kickstart, and those are people with really early ideas. But whenever someone in there says, well, I think I'm going to sell to this many customers, and I think I'm going to need this much money, that kind of raises a question in my mind about, oh, so where's the evidence? I need some evidence, whether some market research, some forecasts, whatever it might be. And so in terms of what that funding timeline might be, so prior to taking any kind of direct action, here are a few things that as the CEO you'll need to consider. One, as I've said before, is forecasting your financials. How much do you need and what do you plan to do with it? You will need to put together a pitch, and there's plenty of information and we can help you to develop that. You'll also need to develop a list of potential funders or investors. And in some instances, it may not be angels, it may not be venture capitalists. The sort of investors are likely to be friends, family, fools, and fanatics. And I would say don't, oh no, I can't possibly ask them. They're most likely to be the ones who would be able to invest a small amount. So this here is a little slide about how startup funding works. So at the idea stage, that very beginning, it's likely to be your own resources or bootstrapping. And bootstrapping means you're trying just to get it up going one at a time. One of the best examples I ever saw of that was a woman who years ago developed a board game called Destination. And it was kind of based on a taxi and the taxi going around doing different things. And so what she did is she went around to businesses in London, like Hamley's Toys, and said, would you pay to have your name on my game board? And so then the next one she went to, she said, well, Hamley's has paid. Would you do that? So you can be really creative with bootstrapping, but it's trying to find small amounts of money that enable you to do certain things. When you get to that development stage where you're kind of bringing that idea into reality, you might get money from more extended family or friends. Then when you get to the go-to-market bit where you need some seed funding, you might get that from a seed fund. There are some accelerators around, so you might get small amounts from investors. And then when you come to investment and expansion, that is where you go into the often bandied about Series A, B, C funding. And again, there's a lot of information we can help you with that. And then finally, if you're going and you're really growing, then you might go public with an initial public offering. So you're offering shares. So that's just a brief insight into how startup funding works. And oftentimes it will be the CEO, particularly in a startup, that's leading on this. And if you have a financial person, not necessarily a chief financial officer, but someone with those skills who's focusing on that, they will obviously help you do that. And if you are in that position where you're looking to do some of that financial forecasting and statements and some of those things, we can help you with that. Those are the things that I wanted to cover off in terms of some key themes for CEOs and things to think about and work on. Does anyone have any questions just in the last few minutes before we finish? You're welcome to pop those into chat or to unmute and speak if you prefer. Well, I hope you found that interesting. I will hang around for a couple more minutes if anyone did want to have a chat. I'll remind you that Innovation Week is on this week. We have a whole range of events that we'd be delighted for you to join us for. Importantly, tonight at 5:30 in the Bayer Theatre, we'll be featuring Stuart Cassels speaking about the opportunity of resilience as our keynote. Stuart was the founder of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. However, through some different health challenges, he was unable to continue as a musician, and so has had a really, really interesting journey. And now works with he works with Macallan, but he's done quite a bit of entrepreneurial stuff in the meantime. And so I wanted to leave you with a poem from 604 BC. A leader's best when people barely know he exists. Not so good when people obey and acclaim him. Worse when they despise him. Fail to honor people, they will fail to honor you. But of a good leader who talks little, when his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will all say, we did it ourselves. So you see, the study of leadership has been around for a very, very long time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week. Do please come to any of our Innovation Week events that you find of interest. And we look forward to speaking to you. You're always welcome to get in touch with me. I'd be happy to meet with you, to answer any questions, or to chat with you about your startup, your idea, or whatever stage you're at. So enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you soon.